From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
That I am Troy Davis, and I will be free, and innocence truly matters.
Death row prisoner Troy Davis. In a rare move, the Supreme Court orders a federal judge to conduct a new hearing in his case to determine whether evidence that could not have been obtained at the time of trial clearly establishes Davis's innocence. Troy Davis was convicted for the 1989 killing of a white police officer. Since then, 7 of the 9 non-police witnesses have recanted their testimony. There's no physical evidence tying Davis to the crime scene. Today, a Democracy Now! Special. We hear Troy Davis speaking from death row. We'll also speak with his 15-year-old nephew, Anthony, and his sister, Martina Correa.
Who support the death penalty and people who are against the death penalty on the same side in a case saying this is an abomination. You cannot kill people like this, because if you kill Troy Davis, you're going to expose the system and you're going to shut it down. You know, and that's what this case is about.
We'll also speak with Ben Jealous, the head of the NAACP for Martha's Vineyard. Then we close at 5. That's what a Texas appeals court judge reportedly said when she refused to hear a last-minute appeal at 5:20 from a death row prisoner. He was executed several hours later. Judge Sharon Keller is now on trial for misconduct. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. is seeking to expand its military presence in Iraq just as the Iraqi government's backing a vote that could force an early U.S. withdrawal. On Monday, the Iraqi cabinet said it would support holding a national referendum on whether to approve the U.S.-Iraqi Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA. The agreement calls for a U.S. withdrawal by the end of 2011, but if Iraqis reject the timetable, U.S. troops would be forced to begin pulling out nearly 1 year earlier. The Obama administration has pressured the Iraqi government to drop the referendum vote despite its requirement under the U.S.-Iraqi troop agreement. If approved by Parliament, the referendum would be held in January. The news comes as the top U.S. military commander in Iraq, General Ray Odierno, has unveiled a plan to expand the U.S. military occupation in northern Iraq. Under Odierno's proposal, U.S. troops would operate with Iraqi and Kurdish forces in Mosul and Kirkuk. The operations would apparently violate the U.S. commitment under SOFA to withdraw from Iraqi cities and towns. Meanwhile, in Iraq today, at least 75 people have been killed and more than 300 wounded in a wave of attacks around Baghdad's Green Zone. The deadliest bombing killed dozens of people near Iraq's foreign ministry. The toll is expected to climb, with at least 5 other bombings also reported. In Afghanistan, at least 10 people were killed and more than 50 wounded Tuesday in a suicide car bombing in Kabul. The dead included a NATO soldier and 2 Afghans working for the United Nations. Meanwhile, militants fired rockets at the Afghan presidential palace and a Kabul police station. The Afghan government has demanded local media censor their coverage during Thursday's national elections. The Afghan government wants media outlets to avoid reporting incidents of violence on Election Day, saying the news could discourage voters from going to the polls. The Taliban have vowed to disrupt the elections and threaten violent attacks on those who turn out to vote. The Obama administration continues to face questions over its commitment to a public health option. This weekend, the White House suggested it could back the formation of private sector options such as insurance exchanges or cooperatives instead of a government-funded program. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs told reporters the administration still favors a public option, but he said its refusal to insist on the public option as a requirement for health care reform falls in line with previous statements. In other healthcare news, 2 influential Democratic lawmakers have asked insurance company executives to disclose details on their salaries, retreats, and other financial information. In a letter sent out this week, Congress members Henry Waxman of California and Bart Stupak of Michigan said they want to examine, quote, executive compensation and other business practices in the health insurance industry. Waxman is chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, while Stupak oversees the panel's subcommittee on oversight and investigations. The human rights group Amnesty International has documented more evidence of abuses under the Honduran coup regime. In a report set for release today, Amnesty accuses Honduran forces of using beatings and arrests to punish supporters of the ousted President Manuel Zelaya. Amnesty says the mass arbitrary arrests and ill treatment of protesters remain, quote, a serious and growing concern. The The Honduran coup regime, meanwhile, has ordered the expulsion of Argentine diplomats. The coup government says it's acting in response to Argentina's expulsion of the Honduran ambassador after the ambassador backed Zelaya's ouster. Venezuelan envoys have refused orders to leave Honduras, saying they don't recognize the coup regime's authority. In other Honduras news, a delegation from the coup regime held talks with State Department officials Tuesday in Washington. A U.S. spokesperson said the talks were held as part of Costa Rica-mediated negotiations and don't signify U.S. recognition of the coup regime. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the U.S. still backs Zelaya's return to Honduras.
The United States supports the peaceful restoration of democratic and constitutional order in Honduras, with President Zelaya's return as president to finish his term. We continue to believe in the need for a negotiated solution and feel that President Arias's plan was an excellent one for resolving this crisis.
Clinton spoke after a meeting with Colombian officials on a plan to expand the U.S. military presence inside Colombia. Colombia has agreed to grant U.S. forces the use of 3 military bases for anti-drug operations, while also allowing hundreds of troops and private military contractors inside its borders. On Tuesday, Clinton addressed Latin American opposition to the base plans.
The agreement does not create U.S. bases in Colombia. It does provide the United States access to Colombian bases, but command and control, administration, and security will be Colombia's responsibility. And any U.S. activity will have to be mutually agreed upon in advance. The United States does not have and does not seek bases inside Colombia. Second, there will be no significant permanent increase in the U.S. military presence in Colombia.
Clinton's comments come just days after a group of more than 100 religious, community, and academic figures urged her to drop the Colombia base deal. In a letter to Clinton, the signatories said, quote, the United States should not create a fortress in Colombia in concert with the region's worst rights of violators, the Colombian military. The letter was organized by the group Fellowship of Reconciliation. President Obama hosted Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak at the White House Tuesday. Much of the meeting focused on Israel and the occupied territories. Obama praised Israel for moving, quote, in the right direction on freezing settlement activity.
If all sides are willing to move off of the rut that we're in currently, then I think there is an extraordinary opportunity to make real progress. But we're not there yet. I'm encouraged by some of the things that I'm seeing on the ground.
The Israeli government claims it hasn't issued any new settlement housing tenders since March, but the Israeli group Peace Now says Israel's still building around 1,000 new homes in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli government, meanwhile, is coming under criticism for a new set of restrictions on movement in the West Bank. Israel's quietly introduced a regulation barring movement between Israel and the West Bank for those holding a foreign passport. Israel's already banned most Palestinians from entering Israel, except a small number holding special permits. But the new restrictions now affect thousands of additional people, including humanitarian workers and Palestinians with passports from foreign countries. In other Mideast news, the Israeli military has declared the shooting of an unarmed American peace activist, quote, an act of war. The activist, Tristan Anderson, was critically injured when Israeli soldiers fired a tear gas canister directly at his head in March. Anderson was taking part in a weekly nonviolent protest against Israel's separation wall in the West Bank village of Nalin. The Israeli military says Anderson was involved in a hostile act, which would absolve the military of any liability for his injuries. Michael Safard, an attorney for Anderson's family, said, quote, if an unarmed civilian demonstration is classified by Israel as an act of war, then clearly Israel admits it is at war with civilians. The Anderson family has filed a criminal complaint with the Israeli government and also plans a civil suit. A newly disclosed memo shows a prominent oil industry group has tried to stage rallies against climate change legislation using oil company employees posing as everyday citizens. The leaked American Petroleum Institute memo was made public by the environmental group Greenpeace. The memo urges oil companies to recruit employees to take part in protests against the Waxman-Markey climate bill approved by the House in June. A delegation of U.S. Catholic bishops